The Concorde sent 15 ships to investigate the disappearance. It was the largest fleet they had assembled in 1,000 years, and it still felt small against the vast darkness of the unknown. Ketfora watched from the observation deck of the flagship as they entered the system, her hearts beating faster than they should. The system should have been empty. The old surveys promised nothing but a few barren rocks circling an ordinary star. But the surveys were wrong. The first thing they saw was the station. It hung in the darkness like a metal flower, its petals spread wide to catch the starlight. It was beautiful in a way that made Ketfora uncomfortable. All sharp angles and smooth curves that seemed to defy the usual rules of engineering. Beside it floated ships unlike anything in the Concorde's records. They were sleek and dark, built with an aesthetic that could only be described as predatory. Looking at them felt like looking at a weapon. Then there were the signals. Radio, laser, quantum bursts, and formats the Concorde's computers did not recognize. The system was alive with chatter, voices speaking a language that the translation system struggled to parse. But slowly, word by word, meaning emerged, human. They were speaking human languages. The Concorde fleet stopped at the edge of the system, afraid to go further. They sent hails on every frequency, announcing themselves, asking for dialogue, pleading for response. For 6 hours, nothing answered. The alien ships watched them from a distance, silent and waiting. Then a single vessel broke from the formation and approached. It was smaller than the others, barely larger than a shuttle, but it moved with a confidence that suggested size meant nothing to it. The Concorde flagship opened its hangar doors, and the little ship slipped inside like it belonged there. The humans who stepped out were not what Ketfora had expected. The old records described them as soft, fragile creatures with flat faces and strange hair. These humans were something else. They walked with the easy grace of predators, their eyes scanning the hangar with an intelligence that missed nothing. Some were tall and pale, built for low gravity. Others were short and dark, their bodies dense with muscle. A few had visible machinery merged with their flesh, metal and wire woven into skin and bone. They were human, yes, but they were also something more. Their leader was a woman with silver hair and eyes the color of a dying star. She introduced herself as Director Chun, and she spoke the Concorde's common tongue with an accent that sounded almost mocking, as if she had learned their language just to prove she could. "We know why you're here," she said, before anyone could ask a question. "The Vathkai sent scouts into our space. We stopped them." The Concorde Admiral, a massive creature covered in ceremonial armor, stepped forward. "You attacked the hegemony fleet without provocation. This could mean war." Director Chun smiled. It was not a friendly expression. "They entered a system we have held for 3,000 years. They scanned our installations. They prepared weapons. We gave them one warning to leave. They did not listen." She shrugged. "They are alive. They are comfortable. They will be returned when we decide the time is right. That is more mercy than most receive." The Admiral sputtered, trying to form a response. But Ketfora was faster. "You have been here for 3,000 years, she said, her voice steady despite her racing hearts. "But the records say your species went silent 8,000 years ago. Where have you been?" The director's eyes found her, and for a moment, Ketfora felt like prey. Then the human's expression softened into something almost like respect. "Watching," Chun said. "Waiting, learning." The story came out over the following days, as the humans shared what they wished to share and kept the rest locked behind polite smiles. 8,000 years ago, when humanity was still young, they had detected the first signs of the Elder, races watching them from afar. Probes, signals, the distant shadows of ships too advanced to be anything from Earth. They had studied these visitors. They had analyzed their technologies, decoded their communications, mapped their movements. And they had reached a conclusion that changed everything. The galaxy was old. The elder races were powerful. And humanity, young and small and weak, would be either conquered or destroyed if they revealed themselves before they were ready. So they hid. They silenced their radio signals. They dismantled their orbital stations. They retreated underground and underwater, building secret cities where no one would think to look. And then, slowly, carefully, they began to spread. Generation ships, moving at speeds far below light, carrying frozen colonists to distant stars. It took centuries to reach each destination, but humans were patient when they needed to be. They established hidden colonies throughout the galaxy's edge, always watching, always learning, never revealing themselves. They intercepted communications from every major power. They studied technologies and improved upon them. They made themselves ready for the day when hiding was no longer possible. That day had come. The HFY have been expanding toward our territories for decades, Director Chen explained. We have allowed it until now. But this system is a line we will not let them cross. If that means revealing ourselves, so be it. We are ready. The Concord Admiral demanded to know what the humans wanted. Alliance? Territory? Power? Chen laughed. We want nothing from you. We never have. Stay out of our way, and we will stay out of yours. The HFY have made themselves our problem. We intend to solve it. Kethvara watched this exchange with a feeling she could not name. Fear, perhaps, but also something else. Something that felt almost like hope. For 12,000 years, the Concord had maintained peace through stagnation. Nothing changed. Nothing grew. The elder races sat in their comfortable systems and waited for eternity to pass. Even the HFY, for all their aggression, played by the established rules, but these humans played by no rules but their own. They had hidden for millennia, building strength in secret, refusing to accept the place the galaxy had assigned them. They were chaos given form. And chaos, Kethvara realized, might be exactly what the galaxy needed. The delegation returned to Concord, space with news that would shake the foundations of civilization. Humanity had returned, and nothing would ever be the same. The great library of the Silith Dominion stretched across an entire moon. Its halls held the knowledge of 12,000 years, gathered from 17 species who had ruled the stars since before most civilizations learned to make fire. Millions of data crystals lined the walls, each one containing enough information to fill 1,000 books. The air smelled of old things and older secrets. Ambassador Kethvara moved through these halls like a ghost. Her serpentine body, covered in scales the color of deep water, slithered silently across the polished floor. She had spent 300 years serving the Galactic Concord, speaking for her people in councils where decisions shaped the fate of worlds. But lately, something had been calling her back to the archives. A feeling she could not name. A question she did not know how to ask. She stopped before a section that few ever visited. The pre-Concord records. The time before the Great Peace, when species still warred with each other, when empires rose and fell like waves upon a shore. Most considered this ancient history interesting only to scholars with too much time. But Kethvara had found something here that would not let her rest. The record was incomplete. Fragments, really. References to a species from an unremarkable yellow star in a quiet arm of the galaxy. They called themselves humans. The file spoke of them with a strange mix of curiosity and dismissal. A young species, barely out of their birth world. Clever with their hands. Quick to learn. Quick to fight. Quick to breed. Dangerous in the way all young things were dangerous. Full of energy with no wisdom to guide it. Then nothing. The records simply stopped. A note from an archivist 8,000 years dead explained why. The humans had gone silent. Their radio signals, which had once shouted into the void with such enthusiasm, simply ceased. The archivist had concluded the obvious. Nuclear war, perhaps, or environmental collapse. Young species often destroyed themselves before they could reach the stars. It was sad but common. The humans became a footnote, a cautionary whisper, a species that burned too bright and too fast. But Kethvara had noticed something the ancient archivist had not. No one had ever actually checked. No ship had visited their world. No probe had surveyed their system. The assumption of their death was just that, an assumption, made by someone who had better things to do than confirm what seemed so obvious. She brought her concerns to the Council of 17, the ruling body of the Concord. They listened politely, as they always did. Then they dismissed her, as she knew they would. What did it matter if some primitive species had died or not? The galaxy had moved on. There were more pressing concerns, and there were. The Vethkai hegemony had been growing restless. The Vethkai were insects in the loosest sense of the word. Massive creatures with armored bodies and compound eyes that saw in spectrums most species could not imagine. They had joined the Concord 1,000 years ago, but they had never truly accepted its peace. Their culture was built on expansion, on the glory of conquest, on the belief that strength was the only truth the universe respected. The Concord's other members had hoped that time would soften them. It had not. For the past century, Vethkai fleets had been probing the borders of Concord space. Small incursions, test attacks. Nothing that demanded a full response, but enough to make the elder races nervous. The whispers in the council halls spoke of war. Real war, not the ceremonial conflicts the Concord occasionally permitted. The kind of war that could shatter the peace that had held for 12,000 years. The problem was simple and terrible. The Concord had forgotten how to fight. Their military forces were symbolic, designed for parades and peacekeeping, not for battle against a determined enemy. The elder races had grown comfortable in their power. They had let their claws grow dull, their fangs grow soft. If the Vethkai truly wanted war, the Concord was not ready to give them one. Kethvara watched these discussions with growing unease. She served on the diplomatic council, not the military one, but she could see the fear in her colleagues' eyes. They spoke of negotiation, of compromise, of finding some way to satisfy the Vethkai's hunger without feeding it too much. But she knew, as they all knew, that you could not negotiate with hunger. You could only delay it. She returned to the archives often in those days. The mystery of the humans had become her obsession, a puzzle she could not solve, a question that would not leave her alone. She searched for any scrap of information, any hint of what had become of them. She found little. A mention in a trade manifest, a footnote in a scientific survey, references to their strange music, their stranger art, their endless capacity for both kindness and cruelty. They had been a species of contradictions, it seemed. Perhaps that was what had destroyed them. Then the news came that changed everything. Vethkai's scouting fleet had entered an uncharted system at the edge of the galaxy. 12 ships carrying some of the hegemony's finest warriors. They had been searching for new territories to claim, new worlds to add to their growing empire. The system was supposed to be empty. The survey said it was empty. There was no reason to expect anything but rocks and silence. The fleet went dark. All 12 ships gone in an instant. No distress calls. No final messages. No wreckage detected by long-range sensors. They had simply vanished, as if the void itself had swallowed them. The Vethkai demanded answers. The Concord had none to give. For the first time in centuries, both powers found themselves facing the same question, and neither knew how to answer it. What was out there? Kethvara heard the news in her chambers, late at night, when the moon's artificial sun had dimmed to simulate evening. She sat in the darkness for a long time, thinking. Then she pulled up her files on the humans and looked at the star charts she had compiled. The location of their home system. The possible paths their colony ships might have taken if they had sent any before they went silent. The uncharted system where the HFY had vanished was not on any of those paths. But it was close. Very close. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she composed a message to the High Council, requesting permission to join whatever delegation they sent to investigate. She did not expect them to agree, but she had to try. The ancient Murmurs were calling to her, and she had a feeling they were about to become something much louder. HFY had requested permission to study the humans more closely. She had expected rejection, or at least months of debate. Instead, the council agreed within days. They were afraid, she realized, and fear made them desperate for information. The humans allowed her to visit one of their border stations. They seemed amused by the request, as if they found her curiosity entertaining. A small ship came to collect her from Concord Space, and she made the journey alone, leaving behind everything familiar. The station was called Haven. It orbited a gas giant in a system that did not appear on any Concord maps. As her ship approached, HFY counted dozens of vessels coming and going, a constant flow of traffic that suggested a civilization far larger than she had imagined. The humans had not just survived. They had thrived. Her guide was a young man named Marcus. He had brown skin and kind eyes and machinery woven into his spine that helped him survive in zero gravity. He walked her through the station's corridors, explaining what she was seeing with a patience that bordered on gentleness. "We're not what we used to be," he admitted, early in her visit. 8,000 years is a long time. We've changed. Changed was an understatement. HFY learned that humanity had split into dozens of subspecies, each adapted for different environments. There were the Deepburn, who lived in the crushing pressure of ocean worlds, their bodies engineered to survive where no normal human could. There were the Voidkin, thin and tall, designed for life in the emptiness between stars. There were the Forged, who had merged so completely with their machines that it was hard to say where the human ended and the technology began, and yet they were all still human. They argued about it constantly, Marcus explained. What did it mean to be human when your genes had been rewritten 100 times? When your brain was connected to networks that spanned light years? When you could live for centuries in bodies that would seem like monsters to your ancestors? The debates never ended, but neither did the fundamental unity beneath them. "We disagree about everything," Marcus said, smiling. "Politics, religion, art, science. We fight each other sometimes, really fight. Wars that kill millions. But when something threatens us from outside," he paused, searching for the right words, "we become one thing. One will, one purpose. And then we are very, very dangerous." HFY asked how this was possible. How could a species so divided become so unified? Marcus took her to a memorial. It was a simple place, a hall of black stone with names carved into every surface. Millions of names, stretching from floor to ceiling, continuing in chambers beyond that seemed to go on forever. "We remember," he said quietly, "every atrocity we have ever committed. Every genocide, every war crime, every act of cruelty. We teach our children about them. We make sure they understand what we are capable of, what we have done to each other." He touched one of the names with gentle fingers. "We do not hide from our darkness. We study it. We understand it. We keep it leashed. But we never forget that it is there." The Concord, HFY realized, had taken a different path. The elder races had buried their violent pasts, pretending they had always been civilized. They had forgotten how to fight because they wanted to forget that they had ever needed to. They had made themselves soft by lying about their own history, Humanity had done the opposite. They had stared into their worst moments and refused to look away. And that, somehow, had made them stronger. She spent 3 months on Haven, watching and learning. She saw humans create art of terrible beauty, works that made her weep in ways she did not know she could. She heard music that spoke of loss and hope and rage and love, all tangled together into something that felt more honest than anything the Concord's artists produced. She read their literature, stories of heroes who were also villains, of triumphs that came with terrible costs, of endings that were not happy but were somehow still worth reaching. She also saw their military preparations. The humans were not building for defense. They were building for war on a scale the Concord had never imagined. Factories produced weapons day and night. Fleets assembled in hidden systems. Soldiers trained in simulations that replicated every possible battlefield. And through it all, a cold determination that Kethvora found both inspiring and terrifying. Then the Vethkai attacked. They had gathered their forces, 100 ships strong, and pushed into the system where their scouts had vanished. They expected resistance. They expected to pay a price for their advance. They were the Vethkai, heirs to 1,000 years of military tradition. They did not expect to lose. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, 73 Vethkai ships had been destroyed or disabled. Human losses, 8 vessels, all of which had been evacuated before they fell. Kethvora watched the recordings with Marcus beside her. She saw human ships move in patterns that seemed impossible, working together with a coordination that bordered on telepathic. She saw weapons she did not recognize tear through Vethkai armor like paper. She saw human pilots sacrifice themselves to protect their comrades, not with desperation, but with a calm acceptance that suggested this was simply what was expected. How? She asked when the recording ended. The Vethkai have fought for 1,000 years. You have been hiding. Marcus shook his head. We have been preparing. There's a difference. He leaned back in his chair, his mechanical spine clicking softly. The Vethkai fight for glory, for conquest, for pride. They are very good at it. But we fight for survival. We always have. And survival is a teacher that never stops giving lessons. The battle was not a victory. It was a message. The humans were not afraid of the Vethkai. They were not afraid of anything. News of the engagement spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Concord debated what it meant. The Vethkai raged and gathered more ships. And in the quiet spaces between stars, humanity continued its preparations. They had joined the fray, and they intended to finish it. The Vethkai had never known fear. Their language had a word for it, borrowed from a species they had conquered long ago, but it was used only to describe prey. The hunters did not feel fear. They caused it. This was the foundation of their civilization. The truth that every Vethkai child learned before they learned to walk. The humans taught them a new lesson. The war that followed the first battle was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. The humans did not fight like the Concord ceremonial fleets, with their rules of engagement and their careful preservation of honor. They fought like animals. Like survival was the only thing that mattered. Like every battle might be their last, they used tactics that the elder races had, abandoned as dishonorable 1,000 years ago. They attacked supply lines. They planted false information. They turned prisoners into propaganda, treating them well enough that some Vethkai began to question whether their own leaders would do the same. They struck without warning and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. They fought in ways that made the Vethkai feel like they were wrestling shadows, and they were creative. So terribly creative. Kethvora, now serving as an unofficial liaison between the Concord and humanity, watched a briefing where a human admiral explained his latest operation. He had placed explosives on asteroids and launched them at Vethkai formations. Not weapons, technically, just rocks moving very fast. The Vethkai defense systems designed to stop missiles and energy beams had not known what to do with something so simple. The losses had been catastrophic. You could have warned them, Cathfora said afterward, given them a chance to surrender. The Admiral, a gray-haired man with scars on his hands, looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death. We could have, he agreed. But we're not trying to win battles. We're trying to end a war. The faster the Vethkai understand what they're facing, the fewer of them have to die. It was brutal logic, but it was logic. And watching the Vethkai crumble, Cathfora could not argue with the results. But humanity's true weapon was not military. It was something softer and more dangerous. As their fleets pushed into Vethkai space, they broadcast constantly. Not threats, not demands, stories. They shared their history. All of it. The wars and the genocides, the triumphs and the failures, the moments of darkness and the moments of light. They shared their art, music that made Vethkai soldiers weep in their bunks, images that haunted their dreams. They shared their philosophy, ideas about freedom and choice and the right of every thinking being to determine their own fate, and they shared what they had learned about the Vethkai themselves. The hegemony was not a single unified empire. It was a collection of species, conquered and subjugated over 1,000 years, held together by force and fear. The Vethkai themselves were a small minority, ruling over billions who had never been given a choice. The humans found these subject races. They spoke to them. They showed them what life could look like without masters. The rebellion started slowly. A mining station that refused to send its tribute. A colony that declared independence. A fleet that turned its weapons on its Vethkai officers. Each incident was small, but together they were a tide that even the hegemony could not hold back. The Vethkai High Command ordered brutal crackdowns. This only made things worse. Every atrocity created more rebels. Every example of hegemony cruelty proved the humans' point. The empire that had seemed so strong was rotting from within, and humanity had barely lifted a finger. The Concord watched all of this with growing unease. Some of the elder races were inspired by humanity's example. Young ones, mostly, who had grown tired of the stagnation that had ruled their civilizations for millennia. They looked at the humans and saw possibility, change, a future that was not just an endless repetition of the past. Others were terrified. If humanity could do this to the Vethkai, what could they do to the Concord? The humans said they had no interest in conquest. But could they be trusted? Could anyone so dangerous ever truly be trusted? Cathfora found herself caught between these factions. She had seen humanity up close. She understood them better than most. And she was not sure if what she felt was hope or fear. Perhaps both. Perhaps that was the only honest answer. She confronted a human admiral about their plans. Not the scarred man from before, but a younger woman with the mechanical eyes of the forged. They stood on the observation deck of a human warship, watching as another Vethkai fortress fell in the distance. "What is your endgame?" Cathfora asked. "What do you want from all of this?" The admiral was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "We do not have one," she said. "We never have. That is not how we think. We see a problem, and we solve it. We see a threat, and we remove it. We move forward, always forward, until we find something worth stopping for." She turned her mechanical eyes toward Cathfora, and there was something almost sad in them. "We have not found it yet. We have been searching for 8,000 years, and we still do not know what we are looking for. We only know that we cannot stop until we find it." Cathfora felt cold. The elder races had goals: stability, security, peace. They knew what they wanted and worked to maintain it. But humanity wanted nothing so simple. They were driven by a hunger that could never be satisfied, a restlessness that would never let them stand still. They would reshape the galaxy, not because they wanted to rule it, but because they could not help themselves. They were a force of nature, and nature did not ask permission. Below them, the Vethkai fortress burned. And somewhere in the darkness, humanity continued its endless march forward. The war ended not with surrender, but with collapse. The Vethkai hegemony, which had stood for 1,000 years, shattered like glass struck by a hammer. The subject species rose up in waves, throwing off their chains with a fury that surprised even the humans who had sparked it. The Vethkai military, weakened by endless battles and betrayals, could not hold them back. Within 2 years, the empire that had threatened to consume the galaxy was nothing but a memory. What rose in its place was chaos. A dozen successor states, each claiming to be the true heir of the old hegemony, turned their weapons on each other. The former subject species formed their own nations, some democratic, some autocratic, all struggling to find their footing after centuries of slavery. It was messy. It was violent. It was alive. The Concord expected the humans to conquer. They had the strength. They had the opportunity. Every analyst in the elder race's governments predicted expansion, annexation, the birth of a new empire with humanity at its head. It was what the Concord would have done. It was what any rational power would have done. The humans did not. They established buffer zones around their territories. They offered humanitarian aid to civilian populations caught in the fighting, building shelters and providing food without asking for anything in return. They occasionally intervened to stop the worst atrocities, but otherwise they let the Vethkai successors sort themselves out. When asked why, their leaders gave a simple answer. They have to learn to stand on their own. If we conquer them, we become the new masters. If we leave them alone, they become something new. Something better, maybe, or worse. But at least it will be their choice. It was a philosophy the Concord could not understand. Power existed to be used. Strength existed to be shown. The idea of having the ability to dominate and choosing not to felt like madness. But the humans did not care what the Concord thought. They never had. Kethfora completed her study of humanity 5 years after the war ended. She had spent more time among them than any member of the elder races, learned more about their history and their nature than any outsider in millennia. When she returned to Concord space, she carried knowledge that would reshape how the galaxy saw its newest members. Her report to the High Council was simple. The Concord expected her to tell them how to manage humanity, how to contain them, how to fit them into the existing order. She could not do that. No one could. Humanity is not a threat to be managed, she told the gathered leaders, her voice steady despite the weight of their attention. They are not an ally to be courted. They are not an enemy to be opposed. They are a mirror. The council stirred, confused and impatient. Kethfora continued. For 12,000 years, we have told ourselves that we achieved perfection. We stopped changing because we believed there was nothing left to change. We stopped growing because we believed there was nowhere left to grow. We looked at our civilizations and saw completion. She let her gaze move across the ancient faces before her. 17 species. 12,000 years of power. And in all that time, nothing had truly changed. The humans show us what we lost. They have suffered more than any of us. They have committed horrors that make our darkest histories seem mild. They have nearly destroyed themselves more times than they can count. And yet, they keep moving. They keep changing. They keep reaching for something more, even when they do not know what that something is. She thought of Marcus with his gentle eyes and his mechanical spine. She thought of Director Chun, smiling like a predator. She thought of the admiral with scarred hands and the other admiral with mechanical eyes. She thought of the memorial hall, with its millions of names carved in black stone. "We can fear them," she said. "We can try to contain them. We can hide in our ancient halls and pretend that nothing has changed. But they are here now, and the galaxy that existed before they revealed themselves is already gone." She took a breath. "The only question that matters is what we will become in response. Will we change with them? Or will we fade into history, remembered only as the species who stood still while the universe moved on?" The council had no answer for her. She had not expected one. The years that followed proved her right. The old Concord fractured, slowly at first, then faster. Some of the elder races retreated into isolation, sealing their borders against the chaos they saw spreading across the stars. They would endure for centuries, perhaps millennia, preserved in their perfect stagnation like insects in amber. But they would never matter again. Others adapted. They studied humanity. They learned from them. They changed their ancient laws and older traditions, allowing new ideas to take root in soil that had been barren for too long. It was painful. It was messy. But it was also beautiful in its way. Life returning to places that had forgotten what life meant. Humanity spread across the stars, not as conquerors but as neighbors. They traded with some species and fought with others. They formed alliances that lasted centuries and feuds that lasted longer. They changed constantly, splitting into new subspecies and new cultures, arguing about everything, agreeing about nothing except the fundamental right of every thinking being to choose their own path. They were not perfect. They made mistakes. They committed crimes. They caused suffering. But they also created wonders. They also showed kindness. They also loved, deeply and foolishly and without limit. They were human. And that, Kethvera finally understood, was enough. 300 years after the fall of the Vethkai hegemony, a young scholar found the old records in the Silith archives. The files that spoke of humanity as ancient Murmurs, a footnote species presumed dead 8,000 years ago. She read them with amusement. This young one with human genes mixed into her Silith blood. Proof of how much the galaxy had changed. Then she opened a new file and began to type. "They were never Murmurs," she wrote. "We just were not listening. But we hear them now. We hear them in every corner of the galaxy, in every language, in every song. They taught us that standing still is not peace. It is death waiting to happen." She paused, considering her next words. "They taught us to keep reaching, and we will never stop." She closed the file and moved on. There was work to do. There was always work to do. That was what the humans had taught them. That was what it meant to be alive.